The minute you can give people a sense that the stakes are actually much lower than they think, to innovate and to learn and make mistakes, and you give people degrees of freedom that I think walk with them for a long time.
If you're not giving yourself the chance to dream about what could be, how could you possibly create value for your organisation other than short-term efficiencies?
It also points to another pandemic, which is the pandemic of seriousness.
Welcome to the Being Human podcast with Amelia Vegting and Jez Francis. Brought to you by Just Add Water.
Hello, I'm Amelia Vegting.
And I'm Jez Francis. You're listening to the Being Human podcast, where with special guests, we explore what it means to be human in this world we find ourselves living in.
We've got a bit of a different approach to our conversation for this episode.
We have indeed. Our friend and colleague Jeremy Sturt joins Amelia to catch up with his long-term collaborator and fellow pioneer, Amy Elizabeth Fox. In their inspiring conversation, they explore their experiences of challenging conventional approaches to leadership development and how addressing trauma and fostering healing can unlock playfulness, creativity, and human performance, both in the workplace and beyond.
So joining us today is the brilliant Amy Elizabeth Fox, co-founder and CEO of Mobius Executive Leadership. Mobius is one of the leading incubators of transformational approaches to organisational change and leadership development. And since 2005 has led thousands of senior executives, top teams and managers through deep, immersive leadership programmes, executive retreats and transformational coaching journeys. Amy and Mobius challenge conventional approaches to executive development by connecting intellectual models and spiritual wisdom to develop immersive experiences for leaders or groups that foster mindfulness, embodiment, open-heartedness, courage, and ethical alignment. Additionally, Amy draws upon the understanding that we live in a world that is currently hurting, and in order to successfully lead in this challenging world, we need to understand how to unlock our inner life and meet family and collective trauma with compassion, begin the process of healing, and subsequently to harness the power and creativity that gets unlocked when this takes place. Amy, welcome to the Being Human podcast.
It's such a joy to be with both of you. Thank you for having me.
Also joining me in the studio today is Jeremy Sturt, co-founder of Just Add Water, who's had a close relationship with Amy, having known her for over 20 years, I believe it is now.
It must be 20
We're
years.
aging ourselves.
Please don't go there.
So Amy and Jeremy set up their organisations, Mobius Executive Leadership and Just Add Water, at similar times. So I'm sure we'll be able to explore the highs and lows of their journey. So Jeremy, welcome also into the conversation.
Thank you very much, Amelia. I'm also just delighted that you've managed to kick Jez out of this seat.
Hey, come on, be nice. Otherwise you might never be allowed back
I won't
again.
be. And it's delightful to see you, Amy. Thank you very much for making the time to join us.
So, Amy, to get to know you a little bit better, I'd love to dive into a couple of questions to understand a little bit more about what makes you tick.
Yeah, of course.
So what is a skill or talent you have that most people don't know about you?
In high school, I had a crush on somebody that was in the marching band, and I was extremely unmusical, but I learned to play the glockenspiel so that I could participate in the marching band. So I have a hidden talent for occasionally clinging the bells.
Oh, that is brilliant. And what a way to get into it as well.
Yes, and I also had a crush on a wrestler, and I started the wrestling cheerleading team. And really, it turns out that there's a very narrow repertoire of cheers you can use in a wrestling match.
Oh, the things we do for love, hey?
Oh, gosh.
There you go, Amelia. There you go.
Amy, another one for you. If you could switch careers for a day with someone, what job would you want to try?
Oh, I would either become a ballerina, because I danced when I was young and I miss it very seriously. It's such a joy to move your body to music and to dance together with other people. So I would be a ballerina, or I would be a fashion consultant, because I really love beauty, and I have 90,000 gowns on my Pinterest page because I don't have time or resource to collect them, but you can clip a picture, and they really inspire me. Some of the really refined, delicacy of seamstry and artistry that is in some of the fashion really touches my heart and lifts me.
You always have great clothes. That's a really good point, actually.
Thank you. Well, I've been trying to think about what is a sort of corporate goddess wear, meaning it's appropriate for the world of business, but has a really like a flair. So I've been trying to pioneer the sort of feminine corporate garb. Yeah.
Excellent.
Nice.
If you could have a personal chef, what would be the one dish you'd ask them to prepare for you every single day?
Well, every day I probably would go for eggs, some phenomenal multiplicity of eggs if it's daily. But if you're just asking me one dish, I would say sole meunière with butter oozing everywhere.
Oh, beautiful.
Nice.
Yeah, that sounds delicious.
Amy, let's start at the beginning for us. Paint a picture of what life was like for you growing up.
Well, I had two academic parents who were very engaged in the New York City school systems, and they were both professors of education. They were very, very concerned about the quality of public education in not just New York City, but in the US. And so I was raised in a household that had a reverence for the mind. I was raised by two feminist parents who very much believed that their four daughters could learn to do anything and become anything. In the early 60s, my father wrote a beautiful book way ahead of its time called The Male Dilemma about the importance of men becoming active fathers. And he was a beautifully engaged father. So I grew up with I think a real confidence and thirst for knowing life. We also traveled a lot as a child, which is an incredible blessing, both because you get to see the world and you begin to know that you are a global citizen at a very young age, but also because it kind of breaks down the prejudices you might live with otherwise, because you meet wonderful people who come from very diverse cultures and live life very differently than what you're used to in your little suburban New Jersey life. I think the fact that I became a global practitioner and I've made my home by creating communities and love all over stems directly from the generous way in which they showed us that the world was an important place to wander and know and learn. Yeah, and I'm the oldest of four daughters, and my sisters are still the most important people in my life, and that's very precious as well.
Yes, I knew you're very close with them. By the way, that's probably our first ever connection. My father had The Male Dilemma on the bookshelves in our house.
I remember that conversation, which so much that you even knew of it. But yeah, lovely, really lovely. I think he may have been the only person that bought a copy.
Well, you never know.
And Amy, are you a stereotype of the eldest of four sisters? Or how
is this an elder child talking?
Yes,
here?
this is. What's your dynamic between you and your sisters like?
There was a game when we were kids, at least in my elementary school, where there was a book that got passed around among the kids, and every page of the book had somebody's name, and you were meant to write an adjective about the kids. And most kids had a variety of descriptors. Mine just said bossy, 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 which I'm quite certain comes in part from having been the eldest child. And it does endure into your 60s. If you're oriented to think you know, then you're oriented to think you're in charge.
That resonates with me as well. I have to say bossy is a word I've had throughout my life. Yeah.
Really?
I think bossy is just a young word for leadership.
Yes,
actually, that's very true. I tell you, that's a really good point, which I think is this: that is, bossy is a man's word for female leadership. We see that happen. We'll come on to that.
Great placeholder.
So your childhood to what you're doing now, what was sort of the kind of threshold moments or the journey that you've taken to be, on the Being Human podcast today?
It's a very circuitous route that is not sort of immediately intuitive when I describe it. I came out of college and I had the enormous privilege of working for a decade at the Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine in New York City, the world's largest Gothic cathedral. Yeah. But at that time, it was a hotbed of ecumenicism, social activism, theology, liturgy, environmental orientation, and consciousness. And it was like being in a breathing circus for 10 years. I got exposed to some of the most visionary minds of our time, some of the most pioneering social change agents of our generation. And I got oriented to believe that institution like that has the potential to really move the needle in world consciousness. My specific role, besides having the thrill of creating 5,000 person events on a regular basis, was working with Carl Sagan and then Senator Gore and Paul Gorman and the dean of the cathedral to try to jumpstart a religious response to the environmental crisis. So we're doing a consortium of different religious organizations beginning to respond to the climate crisis and the threat to the biosphere. And I had, just an amazing apprenticeship watching people come cross what seemed like very different perspectives, very different values, come together in coalition on behalf of a common cause. And I think some of the tenets of how Mobius is formed, for example, with a very conscious desire to work cross-boundary with seeming competitors together to try to increase the level of executive development and humanization of the workplace, much like your podcast, that you cross seeming institutional lines on behalf of something noble and important. That got incubated in me very early in my career. And also the importance of speaking to everyone and being a field of dialogue and being interested in very different perspectives than your own as a way of learning and growing, or as a sort of an important way to be alive in the world. That also got incubated during that time. And then I left the cathedral, and having done really macro policy change and large scale social entrepreneurship, I suddenly got really interested in the intimacy of the human heart. And I went back and got a master's degree in counseling, and I became a trauma therapist and worked in various contexts doing healing work. And Mobius, in some sense, in my part of Mobius, because I'm obviously only one of the co-founders, but my part of Mobius is really at the intersection of social change and healing and personal transformation. So in some sense, those two rivers start to dance together now in the work I have the privilege to do with senior leaders.
That fertilization, all those minds together, as you focused on that particular topic, must have been not only super exciting, as you convey, but also at the time almost revelatory in terms of where it was and the context and the world that you found yourself in. Absolutely.
I mean, I think any of us that have the privilege of doing things that are pushing the frontier of collective consciousness, collective understanding, you have exactly, as you said, Jeremy, the sort of electricity of revelation, the immediacy of co-creation. That's very igniting and very exciting. And also, of course, very challenging because you're going to be pushing the envelope of what the message that people can comfortably hear, and purposefully so. That's what it means to be an agitating force in society. So absolutely, yes, I would say yes.
And then taking the next step, you moved to Boston. Was that from New York to Boston?
Yes, I came to Boston to get my graduate degree, and I stayed because I started to become involved in my sister's extraordinary work at Harvard Law School, where she's a longtime lecturer, and where they have for many years been pioneering resources and collecting wisdom across disciplines for how to help people resolve conflict, how to help people have difficult conversations successfully, how to create what they call value creating negotiation or win-win negotiation. And I had the privilege of, through Erica's support and mentorship, of teaching that body of work for about a decade. And then in 2004, and you will well remember this, Jeremy, because you and I are both fans of the industry, tracking its trends. In around 2004, there was a trend that went, that 2-day training on difficult conversations, that was great, but what could you do in a day?
Yeah.
That 1-day training, Amy, that was fascinating, but how about a brown bag lunch? And I
45
can remember,
minutes on difficult conversations.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And really all you can do in 45 minutes, of course, is entertain people. You can't actually shift the needle on their self-awareness, on their interpersonal skills, on their emotional intelligence and attunement. And I really felt like, having had the privilege of doing work that I believed really was going to make a big difference in the world, both Eric and I were unprepared to participate in something that was going to trivialize what we saw as social imperatives. So that was the impetus for starting the company, was to really say, could we do something counter trend, where we worked with clients who wanted deeper transformation and actually bring in the psychological and spiritual wisdom that we had amassed over our personal lives into this body of work, of executive development and vertical development. And that's been, a living, breathing experiment for the last 20 years.
What I do remember about that meeting you was the strength and the challenge and almost the ferocity about saying we're not going to do it that way. That is not the purpose of what we're here to do, which was extremely powerful for a very naive young thespian. But but it was fantastic.
Yeah, and I think you and I, as I remember our first conversations, it was both my ferocity and it was your unbelievable creative spark that is sort of aligned on the notion that this can't be done in transactional ways.
Yeah.
We're really talking about helping leaders to mature themselves, and that requires a different kind of way of learning and knowing, a different way of being, and an intervention that touches the heart.
Yep.
Yeah, so that does touch on, you guys meeting such, I was about to say such a long time ago, but that's not a very nice way of phrasing that. Is it horrible hosting?
How old were you then?
Sorry. So, you and Jeremy met all that time ago. So what things do you think drew you guys together, other than obviously the stuff you've just mentioned, and also maintaining that friendship for that period of time?
As I said, I loved Amy's challenge, ferocity. We met through a guy called Robert Hannig, and who is just simply one of the brightest, smartest people you'll ever meet. And also has this wonderful way of pushing his glasses up onto his forehead when he's thinking, and then coming out with these extraordinary statements where you go, oh, wow, the world's just shifted. But he introduced the two of us, and you were just beginning your journey with Mobius. So we've been going about 2 or 3 years, I think. And we'd been working on a program with BP, which really was challenging the roots of leadership and the way that they actually looked at the world. It had a degree of success, like all these things, has a sort of life, a potential. But what was more interesting, certainly for me, was just looking at the ways that people like Amy were looking at the world. And that was really different and exciting. And I thought also that the creativity that we could bring, and I would challenge we can still bring, to what can be perceived as rather academic, dry work. Forgive me for saying so, Amy, because I know it's not. But, external perception can really just say, look, you're too playful, Jeremy, and you're too, academically focused, Amy. And actually the truth is nowhere near that, because everything we do has a destination, has an aspiration, and has a point. So that's my memory of the reasons why we started to build out a friendship.
Yeah, I mean, I really resonate with that, Jeremy. And what I can recall, Robert is a pioneer in organizational learning and large-scale systems change. And in that context, I think both Jeremy and I felt like we were at the beginning of a pioneering journey to really think about how you can get out of a sort of model of PowerPoint presentations and leadership development by theory and start actually activating people's myriad intelligences as a way to create a workplace that's not just more human, but more vital, more alive, bolder, more inspired, more noble. And I think both of us are social entrepreneurs as well as leadership specialists and also artists, as Robert is a dancer. And I think, we have a great reverence, all of us, for the creative spark that is the flame of innovation. And we didn't see that as irrelevant in a business context. No. Quite the contrary. I think we all believe that's the future of organizational life. And more, I think, as, exemplified by this very podcast conversation on the humanizing of the workplace, the future of work requires a different level of aliveness, embodiment, spiritual development, relational development, teaming. We now know that all of the antecedents of psychological safety are so essential to the task of innovation and disruptive contribution. I don't think anybody thinks anymore these are irrelevant niceties. I think we now know these are urgent business imperatives.
Amy, you've talked in the past, and you alluded to it then when you were explaining over your journey as well, about the kind of paradigm shift from activism and taking an opposing stance within a broken cultural and political system to a desire to understand and access alternative underlying systems where healing can occur in a more spiritual sense. Addressing the trauma that we experience and collect in life as human beings features really strongly in your work. What first drew you to that human experience of trauma?
Yeah, I mean, I would say two things, although it's a beautiful question. One is, in 1990, I would sit in rooms where the world's leading experts on deforestation, global population, ozone depletion, climate change would be presenting horrific, futuristic data about implications of a non-response to the climate crisis and to the slowness of our response. And there was plenty of information to galvanize a change in public policy and in collective behavior. And there was an enormous delay in our ability to make that response. And it became very obvious to all of us, I think, that it was not just more data wasn't going to solve that gap.
Yeah.
More information was not going to catalyze people to respond. It was a consciousness shift that was required. That's in part what had a global group of scientists turn to religious leaders who might testify and advocate from a moral and ethical perspective rather than an economic or public policy discourse as a potential contribution to helping us to start to respond appropriately. And I think that set me on a quest to really understand what was the delay in consciousness that was causing us to be ineffective in responding. And I came to believe that there's a kind of numbness or emotional cutoffness, not just from the natural world, but from one another. And that numbness is sourced by generations of untreated trauma. And then I got very interested in understanding how family and ancestral and collective trauma starts to create cultural architecture and shapes the ways that we interact with each other and, in fact, inhibits our ability to feel each other, to feel what's happening ecologically, and to respond in skillful means. So then it became obvious to me that if you want to create a climate response, you actually have to become a trauma therapist or a trauma healer, or at least to include that in the context of your work.
Yeah.
And now I've had the privilege of taking thousands of leaders, senior leaders from all over the world, all different industries, through vertical development experiences, through immersive leadership programs. And as part of those programs, we do a trauma screening before people come, in part to orient ourselves to what they're walking in the room with. And I've just come to understand that nobody is immune from the aftermath of trauma. It's a universal pandemic. And whether it's your immediate life experience that was traumatic, which is the case for many, many people. And by trauma, I mean anything that your emotional heart is unable to process in that moment. And that's different for each person. What I might find traumatic is not necessarily what you or Jeremy would find difficult to handle. And also, the earlier that the circumstance happens in your developmental process, the more severe will be the aftermath and the impact. So we know early childhood experiences of trauma have a disproportionately shaping influence on people's later behavior, emotions, fears, etc.
Do you think that's even more pronounced today than when you began this work?
I don't think it's more pronounced. I just think we're more honest about it now.
Right.
And it became more permissible to let that be a conversation inside the space of leadership development. When I started and I would talk to people about the importance of healing emotional scars from personal and collective trauma, people would say, oh, that's very interesting, but that's not for us. Or that's very interesting, but our people would never do that. And I knew then 20 years ago that it was urgent. But I didn't have the body of expertise and experience that I have now to speak about it in poignant ways, in ways that move people, in ways that are immediately accessible to people's understanding. And now I do. I'm just super grateful that I can now talk about it in a way that suggests that almost everybody, given the right invitation and the right context, feels relieved and grateful to have a chance to turn back towards the part they're walled off to and the part of their life story they've turned away from. And that when you do that reintegration of unprocessed emotion and sensation and experience, you unlock people's hope and aliveness and generosity of spirit in the most kinesthetic and meaningful way. It's an unmissable forest fire of leadership potential when you get it right. And so I think it's not so much that we're in a time that's more traumatic. I think it's that we're in a time that's wiser. and perhaps a little kinder. We work with impact teams. We work with multi-client programs where executives from a variety of companies come together and spend a week. And what I find is that it takes 24 hours for people to sort of stop the busyness and the freneticness with which they live and set aside the to-do list and the sort of caretaking and the constant exertion mentally and physically and sort of start to abide inside themselves. And then there's this lovely melting process where people start to share their life stories and life experiences and their deeper values and their most tender aspirations and what really matters to them, and talk about the truth of who they are. And in that intimacy, almost everybody suddenly starts caring for each other spontaneously, whether they've worked together for a decade or they've met 2 days earlier. There starts to be a sense of open-heartedness and vulnerability and caring that is the true nature of the human heart. It just needs a little water, to use your metaphor. When you just add water, it naturally is a flower that naturally blooms.
What does the leadership that you seek to create look and feel like for those who come on one of your experiences or retreats? What does that leadership look like when they return back to the workplace?
I think the first thing is that people feel more personally accessible in the workplace, that it's often the case where people who've worked together for a long time come to a program and on Friday they say to me, I've worked with that person for 10 years and I had no idea they had an autistic child, or I never heard the story of their parents' immigration, or I had no idea that they struggled with anger. We just don't know each other. We're operating, at a very surface level in most teams, and giving people a chance to reveal themselves and share what they struggle with and ask each other for help and to demonstrate that help in, ways that touch people. So I would say one piece is to melt this sort of false rigidity between the domains of the personal and the domains of the professional. And so that's one big difference. I think the second one is that often people have stopped dreaming, and they come into these programs with a tremendous amount of pragmatism and sort of results orientation. And you give them a little bit of a chance to reflect and be in nature and think about what really matters to them and think about what they care about. The same way you asked me this question, if you weren't doing this job, what else might you do? If you weren't stuck in driving day-to-day results and short-term profitability, who could you become as a leader of this company? What could this company start to contribute to life? Those are deep questions that people don't have the chance to even engage in day-to-day work. So you're creating a kind of sanctuary for depth and an opportunity for creativity that isn't so available in day-to-day work. And then hopefully they go back inside those organizations and make that same invitation to the teams they lead and the organizations that they oversee.
The whole point about stopping dreaming and starting dreaming, I think, is a really fascinating one, particularly in trying to create anything new. We'd look at it from the point of play, and the fact that if you don't play, you don't have the chance to create anything new. Play being the center of creativity. But the dreaming component is huge. If you're not giving yourself the chance to dream about what could be, then how could you possibly create value for your organization other than short-term efficiencies?
I love that, Jeremy. And it also points to another pandemic that I hope both of our bodies of work address, which is the pandemic of seriousness.
Yeah.
People walk in and there's a sense of exhaustion and heaviness and depletion. And one purpose of these programs is literally to give people a chance to rest, a chance to exhale, a chance to play, a chance to sing and dance, a chance to write poetry. They often say, I haven't written a poem in 20 years. Well, that's not acceptable.
Amy, have you got a story of transformation of someone who sort of joined you at the beginning of their journey and then, what they left with and how they've gone on to take that you're willing to share to us to, I suppose, bring what you do to life in a story of that way?
We love stories, Em.
I mean, I should say it's really a privilege to watch people go through this kind of a transformational journey, and they always touch my heart very, very much. And each story is, in a way, its own jewel.
Yeah.
because you're watching everybody become more of who they are and to tap into facets of themselves that are dormant or have not yet been blessed. But I'll just share this one story. We had somebody come into the program, beautiful guy, and he had been getting feedback for at least 10 years, probably longer, that he was a phenomenal business leader. People really respected him. He was very strategic. He was very forward-looking, but that people didn't feel his heart and they didn't really trust him very readily. And he'd been given all kinds of silly, frankly, advice, take your team out for a drink or take them out to a ball game or, just get to know them a little. And he was trying awkwardly to socialize with his team. And I'm sure they appreciated his efforts, but it wasn't really cracking the code on why he was stuck in this way. And he said something on the last night that I'll never forget. He took out a flip chart and he drew a lockbox. And inside the lockbox, he drew his heart. And he said, my brother died when I was 11 years old. And in my grief, I took my heart and I put it into a lockbox. And until this week, I never opened that box.
Wow.
And in the invitation of the support and quiet and love of this group and the transformational coaching I got this week, I had a chance to go back and feel some of what was held back in that moment. And now I leave with a quality of love that is my true nature and the freedom to express that. And I remember thinking, what a gift to his family and everyone who's close to him that he's going to go home unleashed in this way. But also, no one will ever again give him feedback about this, quote, leadership derailer that we were, trying to solve transactionally, because the sea change he made inside himself to go back and recover some of that grief and that mourning will leave him with a permanently open heart. He's a different person going back. It's not like he learned a skill or he got a model. He evolved himself. He reclaimed himself. And that depth of transformational work, I believe, is the depth of what's needed when you're trying to change something that's been a habit for a very long time. And that habit, for example, in his case, shutting down his heart, that was a brilliant solution to an 11-year-old that was overwhelmed with what they were experiencing. And maybe even a critical function inside his family when his parents were grieving and they needed him to do whatever they needed him to do, not need them, for example. But it's now an antiquated survival strategy that no longer serves him. So the deepest healing invitation is to address with reverence what made sense in an earlier context, but is now showing up as an inhibitor to your full potential. And to watch people heal at that level, as I said, it's incredibly touching. And I hear from people 10 years later, 15 years later, after they've taken the program, that week really was the turning point in their inner journey. So I have every reason to believe that at least some dimension of that opening sustains itself and continues to be a river of resource in their lives.
That's a lovely story.
It makes me think also, Jeremy, of another thing I think we both have in common in our work, which is trying to help people lower the degree of fear that's constraining their free expression. And the minute you can give people a sense that the stakes are actually much lower than they think, to innovate and to iterate and to learn and make mistakes and try again, you give people degrees of freedom that I think walk with them for a long time. So I love that.
Totally. I mean, I'm working with many leaders at the minute, but particularly one who's just so caught in the short term of cost discipline within his organization. And the point I keep making is, it's fine. You obviously need to be efficient, but at the same time, don't lose the creative soul. You've got to allow the mavericks to have their point of view. They need to sort of be there, because ultimately it's creativity and mavericks who are going to deliver you your value over time. It's not going to be more and more efficiency.
I love that. And maybe that ties the two conversations together, that unlocking the creative soul requires healing the traumatized hurt.
Beautiful.
What role do leaders and organisations have in moving us away from positions shaped by trauma, fear, judgment of others, and towards an existence nurtured more by understanding of one another, tolerance, humility, and love?
Okay, I'll go first and then you'll get a better answer from Amy. The more I work with leaders, the more my belief is that leadership in itself is a paradox. You need to be caring and yet you need to drive performance. And your role is balance in that. And it's a very challenging, demanding position, which people, feel... They feel the sort of both the sensitivities of the role, but also the onerous nature of it as well. And then you have the external pressures, you have all of your stakeholders, your shareholders, whoever it may be. I would contend that the best leaders are those who wear the cloak lightly. That's actually, if you're able to actually bring that humility and that love through your role, and at the same time try to drive what is necessary to be successful in your world, then you can find a path through it. The more that you can create space and time for retreats such as the one that Amy's talking about, the more you will be able to accelerate the work back in the workplace. And people see that as,
I haven't got 5 days.
That's a conflict.
Yeah,
it's a conflict. It's not a conflict. It actually enables you to be better in the long term, or indeed even in the midterm. So I think there is real value in looking at leadership as in that sort of as a balance, a paradox, if you like, but also recognizing that it is your job to actually move the organization towards that sort of position of humility, love, but also delivery as well.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful answer. I'd maybe just add one more point to it, which is, in a VUCA world where things are more ambiguous, more complex, and people are constantly at the edge of the unknown, you have to, as a leader, be able to lower the level of fear to which people are activated and reacting from, because that fear is going to cause destructive behaviors, difficult conversations, tension that's not productive conflict. So I need to be able to lower the level of fear. But in order to lower level of fear around me and to be an open sanctuary where people can bring their fears and their anxieties and their dreams and hopes, for that matter, I have to have done enough of my own work to be telegraphing a receptivity to listen and the ability to listen and attune to what's going on for another person. And to the degree that most of our leaders have lived lives that are more stoic in nature, they're not that open invitation, regardless of whether their door is literally open or not. That's not the issue. It's like, what invitation is the perfume you walk into a room with? And I'm trying to help leaders become an invitation that people feel held, people feel cared for, people feel safe, people feel relaxed, people feel inspired. And I believe the workplaces that are led in that way, you described it beautifully, in a fragrance of love, become places where people take risks, people make deep commitments, people start to nurture one another, they spark each other. And I believe those workplaces have a level of vitality and excitement and ignition that other workplaces cannot come close to.
Yeah.
And who can go on, this transformational path? What do you believe needs to be in place in order for an individual to actually progress through that?
I think it really, really matters how the senior most leaders engage with each other, engage with their stakeholders, and engage with the organization. And to the degree that they are willing to show up with authenticity, vulnerability, and caring, like really humanizing the workplace, that's the degree to which people will feel empowered to do that. I can remember, I know this will sound very familiar to Jeremy, when I was first teaching middle management training and difficult conversations, people at the end of the 2 days would say, "This is great, Amy, but we don't see that role modeled in our senior team."
Yeah.
And I started doing top teamwork, and they would say, "This is great, but we don't see that with our CEO." And then I had the joy of doing CEO programs, and they would say, "Yeah, but the board won't let me." And then in the last 2 years, I've had the privilege of doing programs for board chairs, and they say, "Well, the stock market won't let me." So at one level, leadership requires an act of courage and a willingness, to show up in ways that are non-traditional, and they're evocative and they're provocative, and take the risk to lead in a new way.
Yeah.
And I think, thankfully, Jeremy and I are doing our work in a generation and a zeitgeist in which more and more senior leaders are making this journey.
They are.
And are embracing this opportunity. And it's very touching and it's very meaningful, I think.
Yeah. And it's humble as well. And you watch some quite incredible people be put into positions of leadership and realize they have to step into a new way of being. And it's that, hopefully they realize, and it's that realization which then propels them along a journey of discovery. And that's the joy. The joy is supporting and enabling those individuals to go on that journey, whilst at the same time maybe moving their organization to be not only a better place to work, but also to actually deliver value for the society of which they're a part. I think the challenge quite often, you mentioned it there, Amy, is that we're driven by one metric for growth, which is stock market, cash, dollar, we'll call it what you like. And actually, there should be many metrics for growth. And going way back to Amy's original point about when she was at St. John the Divine, how about measuring the growth of the planet as part of what you're trying to achieve as well? So shifting leadership perspective, I think, is another part of what we need to really think about and do.
Thinking practically for those who want to start the journey to leading in this way, what are some of the first steps you could do tomorrow?
It's a wonderful question. I mean, one simple thing is get out from your desk and go next door to somebody else's desk and have a real conversation.
Yeah.
Get to know them. Ask the questions you haven't dared to ask. Tell them a story that really matters to you. Unveil yourself a little bit and start to create those bonds within the workplace that really are robust enough to withstand real challenge and make a real difference in the sense of connection and belonging in your workplace. That would be the first. I'm totally biased, but read my sister's book, Winning from Within, which gives
that's a great book.
a marvelous roadmap for understanding which archetypes in a transformational leadership repertoire are well-wired and being activated in your leadership style and which are dormant, and then look for some of her wonderful guidance on how to bring online facets of your transformational repertoire that perhaps are not yet in daily use would be a second one. And the third one is, just ask yourself, where can I serve?
Yeah.
Given the resources that are at my disposal inside this organization, how can I help us to be of making a bigger contribution to life?
You've mentioned it. Curiosity, I think, is a massive thing for any leader. Allowing yourself the space to listen. I think an awful lot of people don't listen very well. And by that, I mean, don't listen to interrupt, but listen to really, truly hear what is being said and what is not being said. And in the space, you can find something quite unique if you're listening well. So I think that's really important for leaders. But then in terms of discovery, just reconnecting with the playful side of who you are is paramount for me. By really understanding what play means, and it's in the small things, and then putting that to good use for your own personal benefit, and also for the benefit of those that you serve. To Amy's point, is huge.
And what do you think people can expect to experience as they start rewiring and that reconnection to self and each other? What does that feel like?
Well, I'm going to build on Jeremy's notion of lightheartedness and say it's more joyful.
Yeah.
People who are engaging in this way, I think, feel that they're more embodied, they're more fluid, they have a cognitive agility that they're constantly learning and changing their opinion and refining their understanding and experimenting with new ideas and new ways of working and new ways of interacting. And I think to feel like you're constantly at the frontier as opposed to constantly habituated in every interaction. One of my teachers, Thomas Hubel, says, say something that surprises you. And I love that. It's so pragmatic and it's so meaningful to do that. Just don't say the same thing you always say. Don't ask the question you always ask. Don't be stuck in the role you've always played. I would just add one more, which is celebrate the people around you for their unique and precise beauty. Like, make it a habit to at the end of a meeting or the end of a project or the end of a conversation, thank somebody for something that is distinctly true about them in their nuance of who they are, and watch people light up, because we get so dulled to our own uniqueness, and we start to be interacting with each other in ways that are narrowing of our self-expression. And when you invite somebody into their fullness in that way, it's a simple move as a coach, as a healer, as a practitioner. They start to realize that their self-expression is important, and that their beauty is seen and valued. And that's very meaningful, I think.
Really meaningful. And I think a beautiful note to end the conversation on. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to speak to us. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. And Jeremy, thank you so much for joining the conversation as well.
Well, and Amelia, thank you for running it. It's been a joy reconnecting with my old friend.
Thank you, Amelia, and thank you, Jeremy, for having me. What a treat.
Jez, let me ask you as a listener on this occasion, what did you take away from the discussion that Jeremy and I had with Amy?
So interestingly, and obviously perhaps, I wonder whether I've picked up on more ideas and things I'm keen to explore further just by listening as opposed to actually being in the conversation, which, knowing me as well as you do, you'll know was very difficult for me.
Well, yeah, it was, during the interview, I was sort of half expecting you to burst through the door at any moment.
So the powerful learning for me is that leading ourselves and others often begins with healing our own wounds. By addressing the trauma and the emotional barriers that hold us back, we can unlock new levels of creativity, connection and performance in ourselves and others too. And this is key. It isn't just about personal growth for me. It's about creating places that are more human, more alive, more real, and ultimately more successful for all. And in really practical terms, I was thinking about the questions I might ask myself or others. Where can I serve? How can I lower the level of fear for myself and those around me? And which parts of myself have I locked away that might be holding me back?
Yeah, those are questions, really, really good ones that I think do require quite a bit of consideration. I can't imagine that you come up with, the answers to those questions immediately or with a short amount of time.
Definitely not. They're quite soul-searching, aren't they? And potentially quite intimidating to sit and think about.
Yeah, and I think that for me was what was really powerful about the work that Amy's doing, is that through the experiences that she takes people on with Mobius, is one benefit is really creating that space for people to think and feel differently to how they would do in their usual day-to-day. And just one more quick thought from me, I also found Amy's ability to kind of connect insights by thinking laterally across all of her various experiences and projects really quite incredible. When she mentioned world leaders presenting terrifying statistics of the threat of climate change and trying to change behaviour by just delivering that was really not landing for them at all. Which actually, Jez, this might be a good time for you to say your favourite phrase.
Oh, yeah, okay. Facts and figures don't change hearts and minds.
Exactly.
Is that what you're looking for?
That's exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah.
But, Amy recognised that approach wasn't going to work, but the cause was really important. And turning to trauma therapy and healing as a solution, and now applying all of that knowledge and experience into her immersive leadership programs, she really does stretch the boundaries of where she draws inspiration from. And I suppose kind of in the same way that we at Just Add Water lean heavily on the creative arts with our work to shape experiences for clients, bringing those different worlds together really does challenge our thinking. Sorry, I feel like I've hijacked in and gone on a bit of a ramble there. Was there anything practical from the conversation that you thought of as a takeaway that, either I or, our listeners should do?
A couple of things come to mind. Get out from behind your desk or whatever it is you hide behind. Have real conversations with those around you, asking questions you've never dared to ask before.
Yeah.
See where it takes you. An old favourite of ours, cultivate curiosity. Practice deep listening, not just to respond, but truly to understand others and explore that with them. Jeremy will like this one. Reconnect with your playful side.
Yeah.
Find ways to bring joy and creativity into your approach to life, love and work. And lastly, something that came out for me was sort of celebrate uniqueness.
Yeah.
We're all so keen to be the same, to follow the herd, but actually life is richer if you follow the path less travelled, I think. So acknowledging the distinct qualities of those around you and inviting them to express their full selves, I think, is powerful.
Yeah, it was a really powerful conversation. Well, Jez, you clearly were listening very, very well.
I was. You sound surprised.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Being Human podcast.
Do hit the follow button on whichever platform you're using so you never miss an episode.
And we'd always really love to hear from you, our listeners. So if you've got any topics that you'd like Jez and me to look into, or you think that you'd make a brilliant guest, then please do get in touch.
And if you're curious about the work that we deliver as Just Add Water all over the world, drop us a line. We'd love to talk to you.
Thanks so much for listening, and see you next time.
You've been listening to the Being Human podcast. Brought to you by Just Add Water. Nurturing individual brilliance, forging collective strength.
On the latest episode...
Second now. Are you all right?
Yeah.
My word. I really need to burp. I feel like I'm building up to something sort of like world class.
Well, could you let me know? Because I think I'd rather
Well, you'll
not have
find
it
out.
this close.
You'll find out.